Hey, Glenn here, and if you can't be bothered watching the rest of this video, here's the short story. I think we're going to be okay. I think I have saved this guitar. The new neck is in, and it feels pretty good. I think we'll be all right. We'll know for sure soon. Touch wood. And all the frets are in. I know different guitar builders have different orders in which they like to do things. I like to press in my frets before I shape the neck, and that's because I don't have any elaborate setups to press the frets in with a nice curved neck support or anything like that. So I like to be able to sit the neck flat on a piece of wood like this when I press the frets in. For now, that's how I'm doing things for now. I use these, there's only one of them, I use this insert with a 12-inch radius, matching the radius of the fretboard. I do have other inserts for different radiuses, but I just kind of like 12 inches, so that's what I go with. I find it easy enough to use the drill press, but I would like to get a dedicated arbor press that I don't use for anything other than pressing frets in. Now I won't do the full leveling and crowning just now, but I will just trim the ends off these frets before I go shaping the body, shaping the back of the neck, I should say. So the approach that I'm taking here, it's kind of the result that I usually get anyway when I do this well, is I establish the thickness that I want for the neck there, which is about 19 millimeters, perhaps 18 by the time I'm done, and the thickness that I want there, which is about 22 millimeters, maybe 21 when I'm done. So there's not that much difference between the two, because this is a pretty thin neck. And then, beginning with the spoke shave, connect that surface to that one using a straight line, and then just do that all the way over, from that side all the way across, and then you should have a neck that is nice and uniformly graded down from that thickness to that one, and then you just make it the shape you want by profiling the edges. While I'm using the spoke shave, which I do enjoy using now that I'm really getting the hang of it, while I'm using this to shave down the back of the neck, I just noticed that it was catching slightly on this feature, which I expected it to, and I thought I would just stop and comment on it. Some people, when doing their wood selection, I guess, and this is not to be condescending because I'm still quite new at this myself in the big scheme of things, but if they've only just started building guitars, they might see that and go, oh no, that's not a perfect piece of wood, I couldn't use that to make a neck. And that's going to be true in some cases. There will be defects that make a piece of wood not suitable, but that's not the case here. Not. This little knot here could actually look quite nice. In fact, I think it will. I wouldn't have picked this piece of wood otherwise. Just watch to see what I'm going to do with that. It might have been tricky to position the camera and show you while I did this, but this is what I was going to do with that knot and any small surrounding cracks. It's better to do overkill, add more than you need, because you're going to be sanding back anyway. I just took some epoxy resin glue, made up a little more than necessary, and just covered the area, and we'll see how that looks when I sand it back. I expect it'll look quite good. But that's looking all right and feeling good. Oh, you can see see that part that I filled in with resin. I mean, you can see it, but you can't really feel it because it's just one nice smooth surface. As I smooth it, as I sand it finer and finer, that will become closer to transparent where the resin is, and it'll look quite good. I did this while you weren't looking. It was rather quite a fiddly thing to do, mostly because, as you may have seen earlier, the back of the body where the all-access neck joint is not at all flat. So it was difficult to clamp up, but we'll see. we'll see. Once I've got the clamps off, sometime in the next couple of days, that's really when I'll know if I've succeeded in saving this guitar. Because I've routed the pocket for the new neck, and now I'm putting the new neck in, and it looks hopeful. We'll see. Well, I've taken the clamps off, the neck is glued in. It looks okay, it looks pretty good. I think it's all going to work well, which is great. While I clean up the mess of tools that have just accumulated as I've done various parts of this job, I have just cut some very thin shims, very thin indeed, and used some epoxy and pushed them into the small cracks that existed on either side there. It's all the same wood, all Tasmanian Blackwood, and once it's sanded and oiled, I think it's all going to blend together quite nicely, but you don't want cracks, so hopefully that looks good when it's done. This isn't strictly necessary because I'm going to be applying an oil finish to the guitar, and it doesn't matter that I don't get a perfectly flat mirror finish because you don't do that with oil anyway. But I'm doing it because I think it will enhance the look. The wood that's on the back of this, there is Rimu and there is Tasmanian Blackwood. They're both really quite dense woods. They're not particularly open grain, but all the same, I'm applying a grain fill for any openness that is there, and I'm just doing it to enhance the appearance. What I'm using is Timbermate water-based wood filler and just some water-based art store dye to darken that. And so what I've got here is this sort of soupy grey sludge that I'm just spreading around on the back. I'm only doing it on the back. I don't want to mess with the look of the front at all. And so when I when I oil it, any remaining bits of grain fill after I've sanded it back, and which are sitting in any little tiny pores or cracks or indentations or what have you, will appear black under the oil. And I just think that looks really good. So I'm just doing that on the body. It's very warm in my workshop, right at the end of February, which is the end of summer, which is the warmest time of year here in New Zealand. And whenever I'm speaking to you, I have to turn my fan off because that interferes with the camera. So I'm more about just doing things than speaking about it at the moment. I'm hand sanding the back, which is the surface that I really wanted to have the effect of the grain fill. And I can see that it will. On the rosewood in particular, there are these little flecks that are now full. The reason I'm hand sanding is so as not to be too aggressive and remove all of the grain fill. For the beveled section on the sides, where any of the grain fill accidentally got smeared, I'm going to sand that with my random orbital sander a little more aggressively, just to remove all of that. I want the very back flat surface to look slightly different from those bevels. So sometimes you make decisions on the spur of the moment that are actually quite big decisions. I didn't tell you I was going to do this because I wasn't going to do this. I was just putting some resin in the bottom of the pickup cavities to make them a nice flat surface, and I made up way too much epoxy resin. And suddenly the idea occurred to me, look, don't waste the resin. Epoxy resin is a very good clear coat, and I've already sanded the top down. So you can guess what I'm doing. I'm just putting on some epoxy resin. Oh, that thing you can see in front of the camera is the paper towel. I'm wiping it on quite thin. I'll do another thin coat later. I've never even used epoxy resin as a finish before, but I've seen it done, and it's relatively easy to do. And it does look pretty good. So this is going to dramatically change the look of the finish. It was going to be an oil finish, which is beautiful, although it doesn't provide a whole lot of protection. I'll let that cure, see how it looks, and then proceed. It's not I'm not going to put a really thick, did I say this already? I'm not going to put a really thick clear coat on. I wasn't going to show you this because it's kind of messy and nasty, but I will, because I'll show you my mistakes as well. The second coat of epoxy that I put on here, the ratio of the epoxy to the hardener must have been not quite right, because it didn't cure fully and it remained slightly tacky. So I filled that with epoxy too. Fortunately, what went in there earlier seems to be pretty solid. But anyway, I'll deal with that later. I'm going to fill that up properly. Anyway, so I'm scraping and sanding the epoxy off. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong in principle with me going back and using epoxy, but it was kind of a last-minute thought. I don't think I will. I think I'll go with my original plan of oiling it. But I will, as I said, clean that and fill that. Ugh, what a mess. But it's redeemable. Right, I've sanded and scraped all of that tacky stuff off, which was not fun. I wasn't too worried about the epoxy in the hole here, because I put it in there in 3 lots. The first 2 had just the right proportions. It set rock hard. There was just a very small amount on top when I did the final coat that was still slightly tacky, so I managed to dig that out and I filled it up. I topped up just the very top part with this epoxy glue, which sets quite quickly, forces itself, due to the nature of this syringe and the 2 tubes, forces itself to have the right proportions. It's basically rock hard now, just about. And it's more or less the same stuff as any other epoxy resin, so it will look the same. Right, I'll let that cure and then I'll sand up the body again and think about what to do next. Possibly sort the hardware out. I'll finish it towards the end.